back on, so I appreciate everyone who's here. So we are going to be checking under the hood. That means auditing our website for a smooth ride. And the analogy is because I'm a Volkswagen fan, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. Let's see, I have to close some of these windows because they're in my way. Okay, so who am I? Volkswagen Chick comes from more than just a love of Volkswagens. My name is Amy June, and that's one word, title camel case, for your programmers out there. I use she and her. I'm the open source community ambassador for Canopy Studios here in the Bay Area. I'm a hospice nurse by trade. My ongoing experience as a nurse keeps me in touch with the challenges faced by many end users of technology. When I first got into tech a few years ago and found out that folks could make websites accessible and they chose not to, it really set the pace for the direction I wanted to take in tech, being accessibility. In my continued efforts to make a difference, I help organize Ally Talks, which is, I think I'm going to hit refresh on my screen because this little bar isn't going away, and see if that helps. I'm going to go and present. Hold on, technical difficulties. I live really rural, so I don't always have the best internet connection. Okay, let's try that again. Maybe. Okay, so let's go forward a couple slides. Back to being that hospice nurse, right? I'm still a hospice nurse. I'm still nursing, and that experience really helps me keep in touch with those end users, right? When, like I said, when I first got started in web, I really knew which direction in tech I wanted to take. And I'll be talking a little bit about accessibility audits. That's why I mentioned this. I help organize Ally Talks, which is A11YTALKS. It's an online meetup where we invite folks on every month and we talk about all things accessibility. Because one of the core components of building an inclusive web is really telling people about it. I also co-organize various open source camps and conventions throughout North America. I help empower people to find out how they can contribute back to Drupal and other open source communities in more ways than just code. I have about 5 years of open source community involvement under my belt. I've had the unique opportunity to become involved in both the Drupal and WordPress communities. And what I really try to do is I try to lower the barrier to entry to tech through my leadership of giving first-time contributor workshops at the local and regional and DrupalCon level. I'm a member of the community working group in Drupal. I work on their community health team. And then outside of web, I have a deep love for mycology and geocaching, but those are outdoor interests. And obviously they haven't been part of my life lately, but I do like word games and painting and air-cooled Volkswagens. So here's the little bit about Volkswagen Chick. I'm the youngest sibling of many, and I'm going to make this full screen. I'm the youngest sibling of many, and when I turned 16 and got my driver's license, I ended up with the crappy VW left over in the garage, right? And also in a previous lifetime before tech, I went to school for engineering. And through a series of events, I ended up working at the Volks Cafe in Santa Cruz, working on air-cooled Volkswagens in their machine shop. And about that same time, I embraced email. And the name really came from having to choose my first Hotmail address. Do you remember Hotmail? I know I'm kind of dating myself. But all of these years of creating forum names and profile, I'm still like this deer in the headlights when having to pick a handle. So I just sort of stuck with what I knew. Canopy brings me here today. Canopy Studios is an open source web strategy, design, development, and support agency. And we really work on that support side of things. We specialize in data-driven intelligence solutions. We design and build and support websites for clients who want to make a positive impact, lots of nonprofits and higher eds. So what are some of the reasons why we might want to audit a website? First, your motors might still be running on 36 horsepower and everyone else is upgraded to 45. Your site pages are taking more than 3 seconds to load. Maybe the site is no longer responsive. The site doesn't play well on different devices. Text may look good and fit on a desktop, but then those same blog articles take a long time to scroll through on a mobile device or tablet. Maybe your content authors have to use a crane or an engine hoist to update content. Is updating content difficult and frustrating? And your users just might be confused. They can't find what they need, and they may end up not getting exactly what they came for. This can lead to a lower conversion rate and possibly negative feedback. And then, of course, some folks could have trouble using your site. The visitors become agitated because they can't use your site with their specific assistive technology. And do bugs, pun intended, keep crashing on the site, making it impossible to keep the site current? And then, has the design of the website not changed in some time, making the site seem outdated and possibly risking being boring? Does your site look like everybody else's? Is your site loading over HTTPS? And is it causing security warnings? Your site may have become unsecure. And maybe the site has been compromised or hacked and no one can figure out how many mods are on your site. Is it really that important to address these issues? I know I hear a lot of stake owners say this. Of course it is. A website that isn't working optimally, much like a beat up Volkswagen, can dramatically impact your bottom line. So let's talk about what happens when time passes. And usually time passes much faster than we can imagine. 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if the content and layout is unattractive, and that could damage your credibility. Some issues can break trust in your site visitors, not making them want to return. And then more than half of the world population are active internet users. There are currently almost 4 million unique mobile internet users worldwide. So that's 4 million unique mobile internet users. That means that out of 5.1 billion people, or out of the 5.1 billion people who own mobile phones, 3/4 of them use it to access the internet. And then it's estimated that a little over 1 billion people use a tablet. So as people grow with technology, so should your business to make sure that they're getting the best use out of their devices. And again, 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if images or the data won't load or take too long to load. So think of those content consumers who don't have access to decent broadband, or they live like me, live rurally and that high-speed internet isn't as fast as everyone else's. And unhappy customers end up packing up and looking for other sources to complete their business. That's 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if your images and data won't load. So what are the different parts to the audit, right? To really see that optimal website health, you need not only a solid code base, that technical foundation, but you also need a smart user experience. You can see this as per my lovely non-Volkswagen Venn diagram on the screen. I'm going to focus on the strong technical foundation, and then we're going to talk about the accessibility of a site, because having an accessible site really builds usability. The more accessible a site is, the more user-friendly it is. They sort of work hand in hand. So as developers or coders or designers, we really want to strive to make data-driven decisions. So we need to dig into things such as how people are actually using your site. Um, does the site meet user experiences best practices? And then from those results, can you build out expectations? You really want to make sure that you understand the purpose of the site and how those users are accomplishing their goals. And that's your goal, how to help users accomplish those goals. So there's ways to do this. Obtaining data on the actual site, using Google Analytics and heat maps, accessing whether site functions and features and the information model are really appropriate for who is using the site. Because who's using the site is more important than anything. And perhaps you can test this by using personas. Provide an analysis and feedback and recommendations for improving user experience. And then with that audit, you really want to create a roadmap of items to account for continuous growth, because a website's health is a moving target, especially when it comes to content being added. So let's break down that technical audit. Basically, we want to understand the underlying foundation of how the site operates and how the users are using the site. And I'm going to iterate this a few times through the presentation. It's about how users are using your site. You should take a look at the technical side by analyzing what version of Drupal core the site has. What are the contributed modules? Is there custom code? We want to know how everything works, and that will make it easier to support the site's need. We also want to look at the hosting solutions to confirm that the product owners or the stakeholders are getting the most for their money. Is the hosting platform providing the services that they need? And remember, when we add third-party integrations, they might not be accessible, or they might even slow the site down. So really the goal of the audit is to provide feedback about ways to be efficient. Understanding exactly who the site can effectively and correctly communicate with touches the accessibility side of the audit. You want to run initial scans with tools to help to check to see if there's semantic HTML structure. You want to use analytics to identify top traffic pages. You want to make sure you look at every page type. You want to analyze a blog article, a news article, a contact form, all of the pages. So make sure you use a page with all the templates. Use keyboards to check tab order and if items respond with the keyboard use. And then to finish an accessibility audit, you want to finish with a voiceover or some sort of screen reader to make sure correct semantics and attributes are read correctly. But I do want to recommend, because we as devs test things a little bit differently than native screen readers, I want to stress that you should really have native screen readers test pages, because they do use the technology different than sighted folks. Us as developers can cheat a little bit because we know how the page works or how we want the page to work. And we really want to know how the page works for native users. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen a native screen reader read their page first. They read it super fast. They have rotor controls where they can have different things read first, and we don't know exactly how they use that. And then you want to periodically check in and review for accessibility improvements, because that too is a moving target. And the WCAG guidelines change over time, especially as new user agents are developed and new tools. You know, they're always coming up with more accessible ways to interact with the web. And we want to make sure our websites move along with that change. So let's go through the motions. The preliminary work, and I'm going to iterate because these things are important. What version of Drupal core? Is it a secure version of Drupal core, or all of the security patches applied from the last update or upgrade? What are those top logged errors, and what happened since the last time you checked? You know, you want to review modified files. Was there stuff committed to code that shouldn't have been there? Did someone commit vendor files or local documentation on the production site? You want to check that the patch documentation is there, not just for core, but for contributed modules as well. And these items can usually be inspected with the status report pages, the logged messages, and the top pages not found. And I'm going to go over 3 modules, and they're essentially Drupal 7 modules. A couple of these have Drupal 8 versions, but they're really not up to date. But there's the hacked module. It has the Drupal 8 version, but it's currently not worked on and it hasn't been updated. So I don't recommend it for Drupal 8. But for Drupal 7, it's really easy to use. It checks modules anytime you want it to. It checks the contributed modules against Drupal.org to see if there's been any changes. And it can list all the modified files for you. So it's a really easy way to see if someone has committed code into those modules instead of making a patch. There's the site status report page. It basically tells you the simple things about your site. Is core updated to the latest version? Do we see more green, or are we seeing more yellow and reds for errors? Again, really easy to use. It's a 1-button push. There's the security review module. This was written and maintained by a member of the Drupal security team, and this is for Drupal 7 as well. It makes it really easy to assess and evaluate some of the mistakes that we can make when developing sites. And it does a really quick look at your fields to see if anyone injected any sort of malicious content. Next, we want to examine the theme or take a look at the feel of the site. So let's review all the different things that we can do for looking at the theme. Is the site using a page builder for an editor? Because page builders can slow down the site and make development time more consuming. Because remember, it's not only your end users that experience your website, but also your content creators. So we don't want to have too much of a burden for our content creators as well. Are proper Drupal standards being followed? Are you using Drupal best practices in your functions in places of PHP? Are we escaping output or sanitizing user input as it comes in? Are we making sure that script and styles are added to the head and body, or not added to the head or body? You want to take a look at your templates. Do they contain complex PHP? Maybe your markup isn't semantic. Is there logic tied to the theme that should be put into a custom module instead? And then, is your site responsive? Is your theme responsive? Can people go from one device or another, or scroll down on their desktop to view 2 pages at once? Your images. Are your images being served correctly for the various screen sizes? Are you optimizing them? Are your external resources being compressed? Do you have, let's say, load blocking JavaScript? Loading is another word for rendering. So if something is render blocking, it means that it's keeping the page from loading as quickly as it could. And then, do your templates access and use data according to Drupal best practices? Do your templates, are your styles well organized and extensible? I'm going to cover some of the tools at the end, or we can look at them online too, so we can get to that. Now, for most websites, product owners really want their websites to rank high on Google or other search engines. So search engine optimization, SEO, is really important for stakeholders. So let's check and review some of their SEO basics. Are they using a sitemap? Are there any helper modules? Drupal has some really nice helper modules to help with SEO. There's meta tags, XML sitemap, and meta tag schema. And all of those have really great user interfaces that are really intuitive. Are your headings on your page used appropriately? Remember that headings aren't for style, they're for structure. So is your data structured in a way to support your organization and the content on your page? Does it have the right markup to support Twitter or Facebook sharing? And then you can ask about whether or not Google Search Console and maybe set up a data dashboard for your clients. And then how is Google page speed ranking? You know, these are all things that you can look at to check your SEO. Reviewing custom code. First, you gotta look at what the custom code is, right? Because sometimes custom code isn't necessary. And when it is necessary, we really wanna make sure that it's enabled correctly. Is there documentation for what the module's main purpose is? And then we want to see what documentation is available either on the production or through external documentation guides. And then the important thing to think about with custom code is we want to make sure that it can, that there's nothing there that can be done from an already established contributed module, because sometimes adding custom code can add bloat, which will increase your load times. And code quality is definitely important. You want to make sure that you're using scripting standards. Does the site meet coding standards for your specific tool? You know, whether it be Drupal or WordPress, you want to make sure that those coding standards are up to date. Does the JavaScript validate using JSHint? Or that's a little bit antiquated, maybe ESLint, which uses Airbnb standards, because it declares the rules, right? Does it work in all the browsers? Are all your semicolons in places? And then front-end standards. Are the styles that drive the look and feel of the website structured and easy to extend? Is there a pattern library? Is there some sort of style guide? And again, back to patching. Have patches been made in places that make it hard to update or upgrade the site? And then are the patches maintained in a way that can be reapplied? Is there a nice folder and a README with documentation on patches? So documentation, you know, this is one of the biggest things, especially when more than 2 developers or 3 developers or even yourself. Documentation can save you after you go back to a website you haven't opened in a few months. So first, when you're auditing a site, is there documentation? How do you set up the site locally? Is it configured in a way depending on what local environment you're using? What tools and dependencies are needed? So there's documentation at the project level. That's the overall architecture and the site goals. Are they written down and available to developers? There's the component level, you know, a little bit further down. Is it clear how that custom module or plug or custom theme, how it fits into the overall use of the site? And can that site be easily extended? And how do you do it? This all should be in the documentation. And at the code level, what are the classes, the functions, the variables, and business logic? Is that well documented? So testing for accessibility. You want to make sure that all of your users, regardless of their abilities and what user agents they're using, that they can interact in a meaningful way and get the same information as everyone else. I'll go over this a little bit more in the accessibility section. And then you're only as strong as your weakest link. Does it take longer than 3 seconds for your site to load? Because if it does, you really have a problem. So there's tools that you can look at. You can look at Google Page Speed, Pingdom. There's so many to choose from. For where your site might have bottlenecks in speed, you can look at the hosting provider, make sure that they're reliable and that the specific plan that you have supports your needs. Should it be lowered to possibly save the client money, or should it be increased to help increase the site's resources? Is page and block caching enabled? And then do you have the CSS and JavaScript aggregation enabled? Using a CDN for your images and file assets. A CDN, for people who might not know, is the content delivery network, content delivery network, which is essentially a system of distributed servers all around the world, and based on the geographic locations of the users they pull images from those servers versus servers further away. Something like Cloudflare. Are your images optimized? Optimizing images is the process of decreasing that file size, and you can use a plugin or a script which turns up the speed of the load time of the page. But really having those images optimized for web is super important. You don't want to have a gigabyte file when you only need to have a 4 kilobyte file. You know, the loading speed is super important. So now I want to talk about a little bit about accessibility and assistive technology. So why do we design for accessibility? Because accessibility is essential for developers and organizations that want to create those high quality websites and web tools, but don't want to exclude anybody from using their products and services. According to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, 26% of folks living in the United States live with some form of disability. That's 1 in 4. So when I wrote this slide in the summer, that was 61 million people, 1 in 4. And remember, there's situational, temporary, and unseen disabilities. And remember, as we all become a little older, we become a little bit less able ourselves. Eyesight and hearing can diminish over time. Can users with mobility disabilities, including repetitive stress injuries, they might not be able to use a mouse or a trackpad. So can keyboard users navigate your site? Are there any keyboard traps? If a user enters a component, they should be able to get out of that component too. That's called a keyboard trap, when they can get into like an accordion or a field set, but there's no way to escape out. Does the page have sufficient means to skip features in an application? There should be a skip to main content link, and Drupal is robust. Drupal already comes with that installed. If you'll notice, the first time you hit tab, a link will pop up that says skip to main content. Pages with a lot of content should be broken into smaller chunks using anchor links so people can skip repetitive content. Do all of your elements which receive focus receive keyboard focus? That means when you hit tab, can you tell where you are on that screen with a visual indicator? All menus and levels of a site should be accessible to a keyboard user. You want to avoid using buttons or action items that can only be accessed with a mouse hover function, because we want everyone to be able to get to them. Do all of your images contain alternative text, also known as alt text? Are there any images of text? Because images of text, as they get zoomed and resized, can obscure and you won't be able to tell what they say. If you turn off all your CSS and JavaScript or style sheets, can you read through the site without getting lost? This isn't only for screen readers, but some folks with cognitive issues might turn off images in their browser. And of course, like me, some people turn off images because the internet is so slow, it just takes too long to load. And of course, some images don't need alternative text. There's icons or decorative images, things that are supported with the content around them. Are the tables used for more than tabular data? Remember that tables are for data and not for layout. That was Dreamweaver. We're in Drupal now. We're not using tables anymore for layout, but we're using it for data. So our table should really include headers and rows and columns that explain how the cells correspond with each other. Does the screen reader read all of the content as it's presented on the screen? This includes modal dialogues, overlays, pop-ups, light boxes, slideshows, error messages, page updates. Be sure that all of these alerts are read in real time. Can the text be resized without obscuring any content? The page should be fully functional, I don't think functionable is a word, but functional when the text is magnified to 200% of its original size. You want to make sure that the content doesn't require scrolling in 2 directions either, both vertically and horizontally at the same time. Are your landmark regions properly defined between ARIA and HTML5? Remember that the first rule of ARIA is not to use ARIA because a lot of HTML5 is accessible and semantic. So many of those functions that used to require ARIA are now implemented in HTML5. So if you're not already current on HTML5, it's a good time to brush up. So what makes a website accessible? There's 4 broad parameters when we consider that we need to consider when we make our content accessible. We want to make sure that it's easy to see, so we accommodate visual needs. We want to make sure that it's easier to interact with, so we accommodate motor needs. We want to make sure it's easy to hear, so we accommodate auditory needs. Oh, I think I don't have that text right, but that's okay, you'll forgive me. We want to make sure that it's easy to understand, so we accommodate cognitive needs. We want to make sure that experience is as equivalent as possible, regardless of things we cannot control. And these are things like computer size, tablet size, what phone operating system they're on. Remember, some people are using older cell phones in nations where that's all they have, and maybe they're on Internet Explorer on an older Windows phone or a flip phone. So we just want to make sure that we make the experience as equivalent as possible. And remember, with accessibility, content is as important as code. So not only in your audit, you want to have the technical part and the user experience, but part of that user experience and accessibility is the content itself. And as the internet expands, the world becomes smaller. We're on a world stage now. We need to remember that reading and understanding the English language can be a privilege. Our content should be easy for everyone to understand. According to usability.gov, we want to write at the 9th grade reading level. The ideal standard is no more than 20 words per sentence, 5 sentences per paragraph. We want to make sure we use plain language. That means no jargon or buzzwords, because those can muddle clarity. If we use acronyms and numeronyms, we want to explain what they are before we use them as acronyms and numeronyms. And we want to break up our content because I don't know about you, but I don't really read anymore. I scan. So breaking up that content into like structured headings and bullet points and numbered lists really makes it easier for me to come back to that page too, because it's an exit point and an enter point for our eyes. Captions, subtitles, and alternative text. And these are all things that we should test for when we're doing an audit. We want to make sure our images, videos, and visual information have that alternative text. I heard there was a session yesterday on alternative text. I didn't see that, but I recommend going back when the videos are up on the Stanford site and watching that. When creating alternative text, the text should contain the message you want to convey through the image. If the image includes text, that text should also be included in the alternative text. If your site contains a slideshow, make sure that each photo or each image has alternative text, and it can be navigated via the keyboard, making sure that the video player or the media player is accessible by keyboard. Captions should include inflection, such as yelling or whispering. Image captions may include content to the alt text, such as like the alt text saying like man and boy playing basketball, where a caption might say, studies show that bonding between father and son help with long-term skill building. Tables and infographics should also have clear headings, and assistive technology users should be able to interpret all the data that's on the page. Be sure audio and video files include transcripts. PDFs, now they're a beast on their own. Most people know this, but we want to make sure that the site links to information that is accessible as well within those PDFs as well. Folks who utilize assistive technology rely on clear and concise alt text for context. And like yesterday, we can talk for hours on just how to create good alt text. Headings, they are for organizing content. And I cannot stress this enough. Headings are not for style. Headings are not for style. They have a function, and people who rely on adaptive devices depend on those consistent and predictable heading structures. It makes it easier for them to consume the information. And also, back to people don't read anymore, they scan. So it helps people enter into those articles. And those H1 to H6 tags are used to define the HTML headings. And so the H1 defines the most important thing on the page, and the H6 defines the least important thing on the page. Most folks will say that there should only be one H1, but that's not necessarily the case. The new WCAG standards are loosening up on that a little bit. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Audits are important to not just developers, but to site owners, so they know the status of everything. So after doing a technical and user experience and accessibility audit, making sure that that documentation is clear is important for those site owners. An audit can consist of different sections. Again, the technical, the user experience, and the accessibility. When reviewing the technical side, look at the different aspects of the Drupal reports and use those to review the performance of the site. Web accessibility encompasses all disabilities that affect access to the web. So you're not only really focusing on people who use screen readers, but you also want to think about people who have neurodiversity as well. Accessibility isn't just code, but it can be part of content. And reviewing accessibility code, making sure to check it against those WCAG standards, because in higher ed, the WCAG standard is AA. There's 3 levels. There's the A, the AA, and the AAA. It's really hard to have a AAA compliant website, but we really strive for 508 compliance is that AA level. And making sure your content is accessible by having it be structured and understandable. So that was a whirlwind and there was a lot of information. So I want to thank you. Are there any questions off the top of people's heads? You can unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Amy June, for such a lovely presentation. I have a question for you. So, I mean, this kind of audit process is super important. At the same time, it becomes a question: is when do you, I mean, when in your development process do you do such audits?
Well, in theory, it's baked into your build. Your designers and your coders should already be building performant websites. But if you've taken over a website, that should be one of the first things that you sort of do an assessment for, because a lot of these issues are global and can be taken care of like really fast. The performance things, you can go on to things like Google Page Speed Insights and run speed checks, and it will tell you some of the things that are slowing your site down. There's tools like Pingdom that will compare and look at like maybe how your website is using CDN assets.
So the question is you have a build process, right? Mm-hmm. But there are certain things that are not things that you can put into a build process, like manually testing your accessibility pages.
Okay, so I don't know if folks know this, but there are pay for automated accessibility tools. There are some major caveats with that, because automated testing only covers 25 to 30% because it's errors that are programmed in. So manual testing is really important for accessibility. And I pulled up this Starbucks page and this tool that I use. There's Site Improve, which is a pay for service that does do automated testing, but they also provide a free browser extension tool. And this is really a neat tool because it's just a browser thing. I clicked a button here and then this little checker comes up. If I click down on the errors, it will show me what I need to manually test for with this eyeball icon. If you hover over it, it says review, and it says, do the ARIA labels attribute accurately describe the element? But it's telling me what to manually review. If I go down a little bit more, you can see that there's an error. So it indicates it as an error. But this is really handy because it reminds you of what to test for manually. And if you expand it, it will actually tell you what element it is as well. So that's kind of a handy tool. And then the number one thing, like I said, like, I don't know if you saw that open up, but I hit tab and the skip to main content came up. And then just making sure you tab through your pages and making sure that the tabbing sequence is in a logical order. And then as far as screen readers go, I am a firm advocate that you should really have native screen readers use the tools because we have Macs and we're using VoiceOver, but most native screen readers use JAWS and NVDA. So, and those take months, weeks, tons of hours to learn. And so really having that native user really kind of drives in, like, I mean, we can only test for so much without knowing how to use the tools. So
how often do you pull them in?
Well, so this is something my agency doesn't do yet, but I know that Berkeley offers accessibility labs, and they'll have people come in. And I would say having someone come in at the build level, you know, right after your build is done for the user experience testing, I think that's a good time to do it. Because a lot of times those screen reader issues are global, you know, where it's the same error from page to page because something wasn't marked up right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Jeff asked, what is your rule with applying patches? So my rule with applying patches is in the code base, I have a patches folder, and it will list every patch and why it's there and give the Drupal.org number of the issue queue. And that way, if something happens to the site or you upgrade and you go into that patches folder, you can, one, go back to that issue and see if the patch has been committed, that you even need to apply it anymore. But having that patches folder within your repository, that's where I keep it. You're welcome, Jeff. Anything else?
I just want to say thanks. That was super extensive. I'll be watching the video when we post it later.
And then I think Canopy has blog articles like that have a few of these steps like really defined more. You know, this was sort of an overview of the whole process and things to think about. But if you go onto the Canopy blog article page, you'll see that some of these tasks are broken down a little bit more.
I'm familiar with the tasks and I'm familiar with the ways of thinking and then how skills you describe and wield like a Jedi master, you know, come to you after years and years of practice and someone posted what specific tools, but I'm wondering what user groups do you find are helpful? Because you mentioned the Ally Talks and the WCAG group. I find attending camps and conventions helps reinforce my thinking to go, oh yeah, remember that. And that's how I build, you know, the habits and skills so that it becomes something I do. So in terms of participating in more events, more presentations, what helps you get those skills?
So it's not been happening recently, but I live in the Bay Area, and so one of the LinkedIn employees, Jennison, has a Bay Area accessibility group that meets once a month, and then every spring or summer they have Bay Area Accessibility Camp, and I've gone there for a few years, and there's some really good presentations there because a lot of people who actually use the software differently from us are giving presentations. And I think that's really valuable, is actually listening to how real users use the software as far as accessibility goes, because it's interesting, because it's so much different than the way we use it.
Right. The I've seen you post about that conference and such. So let me say thank you for your support of accessibility work in the community. It's awesome.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'm someone who grew up with family members who were deaf and friends who were deaf. And then it didn't occur to me until later in college, when we're driving around in the car at night and using sign language, we have to leave the dome light on so you can have a conversation. That was a real head smack moment for me. I'm like, oh yeah, of course.
Right.
And they use the technology differently.
And
so that's a super.
And I've noticed that because I've given a couple of virtual camps since we've all gone virtual, and I've noticed how people will be, nodding their heads or, raising their hands, not thinking about whether or not people are looking at the video too, so we're all sort of growing and adjusting, and, and it all sort of like changes with time. So it's really interesting in this. And I think like the accessibility part, especially as we move into the digital space, is so important too, making sure that we have those captions and live captioning when we can. And because not everyone uses Zoom the same way I do, so.
Right. Well, if I can add one quick comment to, 1 in 4 people is going to be somebody who needs accessibility considerations in some way. Handicapped people, not only are they 1 in 4, they utilize internet services and connections 10 times as much. So when I point that out to employers and teams, that really helps underline the point and floors them. It's like, this is 1/4 of your market, and they're going to utilize your website 10 times more than everyone else. Isn't that someone you really want to make sure you have it right for?
Right. Well, and I'm all about inclusivity too, because I love everybody, and I want to make sure that everyone has access, whether it be because your performance is not as good, because I'm going to leave a website because I can't get to it because I live in Hollister, you know what I mean? So I'm a user to think about, and I'm pretty able-bodied, but like having those like flashing banner images, are you going to lose some of your, autistic folks or people who suffer from visually induced motion sickness? They're going to leave your page because everything's, flashing and going, and yeah, just something to think about.
Thank you so much. Great presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye, guys.